All right, guys. Happy Thursday, October 7th. Welcome into BamaNews, show number 6, week number 6 of the college football season. Absolutely just flying by, Patrick. This is crazy. Alabama 5-0, kind of as expected, going into week 6 of the season, taking on a Texas A&M team that is not 5-0, that is 3-2, in fact. Not exactly the Aggies team I think that folks thought they would be. But thanks for tuning in, guys. BamaNews. I'm Simone Eli. He's Patrick Greenfield. We're talking all things Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, all the things Texas A&M, Kyle Field going into this week. And to help us do that, we bring in Mike Rodak, the Tide beat reporter for AL.com. Has a really great story out this week. We'll talk more about that. Who could trip up the Tide? He doesn't really have an answer for me, which I criticize him for, but we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, guys, one of my favorite storylines in the SEC is Nick Saban and his former assistants or guys who he's been on the same staff as. Jimbo Fisher falls into that category. And this relationship is one that is just very entertaining to me. I want you guys to weigh in on just the back and forth between these two, because they do like each other, but it is just kind of funny every time they play each other what it's like.
Well, I'll go first. Pulling a stat out of the May column from the "We're going to beat his bleep" when he's there. That was what Fisher had said at the Houston Touchdown Club.
Yeah.
Saban's teams have outscored Alabama 144-75 the last 3 seasons. And that's with the team that finished number 4 in the nation. So maybe Jimbo's just a little bit over his head in the SEC. I remember actually a really funny quote when Landon Dickerson got to Alabama, and Nick Saban said, well, we treat our players a little bit better than at Florida State. And that was when Jimbo had just come out of Florida State. He had Landon. So I think Saban might be able to just teach his former assistant another lesson this week.
That's a good poll. I don't think I've heard of that quote. I think it was right. Actually,
I should have broken it out when I was at the press conference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, it was right before I got here, so I don't remember that. But yeah, it seems like, to me at least, just from afar, it seems like Jimbo probably is in a different tier in Saban's mind as far as like the former assistants, just because like they're both from West Virginia, age-wise, they're closer. They go back a little bit further, going back to LSU. Whereas I think you can kind of put like the Alabama guys who are coaches, Lane's still there, Kirby's still doing it. I mean, Pruitt was obviously head coach previously, Will Muschamp, like different category, I think, for some of those younger guys. Like I think there's probably a different level of respect there for Jimbo. And
I agree.
Even with the comment that he made in May, like, I mean, Nick Saban kind of went down the same path in terms of telling a bunch of people in Texas something about his team, and that probably doesn't, feel great about now, or maybe he regretted the whole thing about Bryce Young and making $1 million. I don't know if he thought that was going to get out of that room. I don't think Jimbo thought that his line was going to get out of that room. So at the end of the day, I think Saban's all right with all of that.
Yeah, you have to consider where he was. It's not like it was a press conference. He is talking to guys who probably put money into the program. Those are the type of things that he needs to say. But Nick Saban did have a relatively funny response when he came down here in Mobile, and I asked him about that. And he said, in golf, so they do have fun with each other. And I love that relationship. I think it's quite entertaining. But talking about this Texas A&M team, guys, came into the season ranked in the top 20 program that was, what were they ranked when they first came into the season, Rodak?
Number 6.
Yeah. So was it 6? Okay, didn't realize that. I thought it was like 16. Okay, so ranked 6 in the country. So the expectations were high, at least in the media's eyes, of people that are voting. And I think that folks thought that the Aggies would not only be a SEC contender, but potentially a national championship contender. That has not exactly been the case. The Aggies 3-2 on the year, 0-2 in the SEC with losses to Arkansas, and then most recently Mississippi State. Arkansas is kind of in this resurgence of a season. Mississippi State, kind of a shocker for the Aggies there. Rodak, when you look at this, how much has this team under-delivered so far this season?
A lot. I mean, you can kind of sense the pressure that Jimbo's feeling at A&M. I watched his Monday press conference, and he was, getting some questions about kind of where they're at. And this is year 4 for him now. He just got that extension on top of his original deal, and his original deal was huge. 10 years, $100 million, I think it was.
Yeah.
And there's pressure at A&M. It's in terms of like wealthy athletic department sits right up there with anybody else. And they're kind of stuck in a division where they have to play Alabama every year. And that's when you lose to Alabama 8 times in a row, as they have, you're not going to get to the SEC championship game, and you're probably not going to get to the playoffs. So that's kind of the position where they're stuck in. And I think it was more sellable for Fisher to say last year, okay, we only lost to Alabama, and they played them competitively for, 2.5 quarters maybe.
Sure.
But now it's like, all right, you're going in, you're losing to Arkansas, and then you're losing to Mississippi State at home. I mean, that might be the low point of kind of recent history for them where, they've had the injuries with Haynes King being out at quarterback, but they look bad in the fourth quarter there where they had a couple chances to come back and win, and they moved backwards in the red zone, and then they had the safety they took after that. So that offense actually gave Alabama a little bit of trouble last year with Anaya Smith and Jalen Weidermeyer and Isaiah Spiller. Like, there are some players there, but just the overall product is not looking good.
Yeah, Patrick, you put the stats up for us here, and I mean, it's just not look like the type of numbers that you would expect. Injuries or not, I mean, this is still Texas A&M, and the expectation, at least I think in my mind and a lot of folks' mind, is that this is not enough.
No, it's not. And it's a very interesting there's a few interesting stats from here, but Texas A&M does not have a player in the top 10 of the SEC in receptions. It doesn't have a player in the top 20 in reception yards. And it doesn't have any yards per catch. The tight end, Jalen Weidermeyer, is 29th. That's just the SEC. So, you lose your quarterback, freshman, fractured ankle in your second game. You bring in your sophomore, as you can see, Calzada, who we were just talking about. He actually only threw 1 interception in his first game with 1 attempt to Kent State. Nick Saban will be happy. But you have a first-round running back in Isaiah Spiller. You had all this talent coming back at your skill positions, but you lost all of your offensive line and your quarterback. There's no way you're going to be able to compete in the SEC. I don't know why they were ranked number 6 to begin with, but here we are.
It's a byproduct of where they finished last year. But then they lost Kellen Mond, and like a lot of teams lost their quarterbacks.
I hate to interrupt you. That's what you're going to hate this, Simone, bringing up. Did Alabama be number 1 in our first show? But the Clemson, the Notre Dames, the Texas A&M in the world, you can't lose your signal caller, your senior signal caller, and be competitive in the SEC West.
Yeah, I think that a big part of, you always bring this up, and I don't know why you continue to bring it up, because Alabama deserves to be the number 1 ranked team in the country.
Just all teams, do they deserve those preseason rankings? I
mean, deserve, not deserve. The only thing that you can really go based on is what the heck happened a year ago. I mean, nobody's a fortune teller. So when you come into the season, you got to go based on what's been done in the past, what returns. I mean, all of those things is just factors into the voting. I'm not a voter, but I mean, I assume if I was a voter, that's what I would vote on, is what happened last year, who's coming back, what the heck has happened over the last couple of years. Is this like some sort of dynasty that has built like we've seen in Alabama? Is this a team that's remained consistent like we've seen at Georgia? So I think that has to play into. And then for Texas A&M, I think you guys both hit it on the head, is that just having the resources, having the expectation. Jimbo Fisher, he's won a national championship before. It's always like, okay, when is the year going to happen for the Aggies? And the year has not come yet. And again, part of that is playing in the West, having to play Alabama, and the difficulty that comes with that. But it doesn't really change the perspective when it comes to fans' minds and what they want to see. It's kind of like at Auburn. The expectation is always there to beat Alabama. Does that always happen? No, absolutely does not. But the expectation is there regardless of a new coach, new system, whatever it may be. So the expectations for Jimbo right now, there's a little bit of a heat there. I'm not going to sit here and I hate being the one that, calls for coaches' jobs or anything like that, or says who's on the hot seat. I'm not about that. But I think that there is a certain amount of pressure when it comes to what Jimbo Fisher is facing. And we've seen it. It's kind of like a carousel throughout the SEC and definitely in the West. When you're not getting it done, folks want to get it done, especially against the number 1 team in the country. So there's a big opportunity for Texas A&M this week. I just don't think that the opportunity is very realistic when it comes to getting it done this year against the Alabama Rodak.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think maybe we'll segue into our next segment. I was just thinking that, the A&M coming up, and then Mississippi State, Tennessee,
Sure.
I was just looking at the stat this morning where Alabama is a combined 35-0 against them, and their winning streaks against those three teams. So
yeah,
we've just kind of reached a point in the season where it's like, yeah, I mean, something could happen when you're playing all these unranked teams, and Alabama has 5 unranked teams ahead of them, but the odds are that they won't. I mean, they've won 100 straight games now over unranked teams. This would be their 20th win in a row. They haven't trailed in a game at all. Alabama hasn't trailed in a game at all in almost a year now. October 17th of 2020. So, yeah, I mean, Nick Saban can stand up there every week and say, we need to take this game seriously and all that. And that's true. I mean, anything can happen. That's what he needs to say as a coach. But sitting where we are, I mean, this team's probably –
that sounds like some rat poison to me, Rodak, is what I want to say. That sounds like some rat poison to me. But you just mentioned it. You do have a story out this week, the last couple of days, as to who can trip up Alabama. Is there anybody that can trip up the Tide? You don't answer the question in the article. I just want to make that clear. So when y'all go read it, it's very resourceful. You learn a lot in the article. You will not learn who Rodak thinks will beat Alabama because he doesn't think anyone will. But there is a lot of good information on there as to where the Tide have improved, where they still need to improve, where they've just been good, from day one. Patrick, I know that you got a chance to look at that as well. What sticks out to you the most when it comes to Alabama moving forward? Is there anybody who could trip up the Tide in the regular season?
I think to defend Rodak on his own article, and yes, the lack of him naming someone, he names stats. Alabama's going to trip themselves up. They have only themselves to beat. I know that's what you meant. Obviously, I switched on the Ole Miss pick last week, and I'm glad I did because they destroyed them. But, Auburn.
You're doing a lot of switching.
Hey, Auburn still has a lot. It's the Iron Bowl magic. I mean, I feel like Carson just told Bo Nix to run around. That was the game plan, and you saw that happen. Anything could. What's that?
He's been doing that for years, but yes.
Yeah, he went back to the Pinson Valley days against LSU. But, the Iron Bowl, anything can happen in that. You're really turning on the TV to Georgia every week. And it's this Georgia team is the elephant in the room that we're all going to have to wait in Atlanta to see again. I mean, I pretty much see them kind of, unless a crazy Iron Bowl magic happens, they still make the SEC championship game. And then you still have to face that enormous pressure that is that Georgia team, probably Kirby Smart's best team ever.
Right. Yeah. We've kind of reached a point in the movie or the book or the show where you're like, all right, like, just give me the ending. Like, what's going to happen at the end? And I mean, Georgia theoretically, like, they're playing Kentucky, they're playing Florida still. Like, anything could happen in those games. And I mean, it's kind of weird. It's 2021, and here we are talking about Kentucky beat Georgia. And
goodness, true.
Kind of true, I guess. But I mean, ultimately, and LSU, like, maybe is a threat to Alabama. I don't know. That's weird thing happen with them. But yeah, I agree.
Maybe in the weird things category. I would put LSU and Auburn in the weird things have happened category, not necessarily the let's actually be competitive category.
I think everybody's going to be thinking about 2019. They're going to roll in that stadium, and Alabama is going to destroy LSU. And
nobody at LSU is thinking about 2019. That ship
nobody
has
at Alabama.
That ship is no. And LSU and Alabama in the country. No one's thinking about 2019.
Alabama fans will. Players will. They got that energy out last year. I feel like when they went to the Baton Rouge, they just destroyed them. That was kind of like, all right, Coach O, like you see what we can do.
Sure.
Now it's like a lot of those players are gone. Like there's not a lot of guys on this team that played in 2019 or even were here in 2019.
Yeah, that team's gone.
I agree. All you need to do is play that roll what video again inside Bryant Denny, and that is a little bit of fuel for the fire. Listen, this team, Alabama, people think they're boring. I guess I love to see the competitive fire. The goal is to get to the college football playoff and then go to the national championship and win the national championship. And if you have to do it against Georgia twice, that's who's going to trip you up. It's not going to be LSU, Tennessee, or a bad Mississippi State team.
I agree.
Even an Auburn team that cool. Maybe you'll beat them in the Iron Bowl, but this Alabama team is pretty slick right now.
Right. They are. And I would agree that they are a little bit boring. And that's kind of like the difference.
Joyless murder ball. Isn't that what they call it on the Twitter land?
Yeah. I mean, it's a different team where like there's not that high flying offensive star. I mean, Bryce Young's had some good games, but it's not like historically good games. Like you're thumbing through the record book during it. And that's just kind of who they are. But like they're still they're up 35-0 against Ole Miss. Like they're still beating the stuffing out of teams, and that's just who they are. And I agree. Like Georgia is that one team that can threaten them, and even so, like I think Georgia and Alabama would still make the playoff. Depending or no matter what happens on that SEC championship game. And
I agree.
Maybe
I think one thing that could threaten the Tide a little bit, and we're going to talk about it right now, is injuries. Injuries obviously impact every program in the country. There are some injuries for the Tide in the near future, in like the distant future. What things look like down the line for Alabama. Rodak, I want to get your thoughts on this, having just been at some games and the impact of the injuries when it comes to Drew Sanders, when it comes to McClellan, kind of how that impacts this program moving forward.
Yeah, I'd say they're better equipped at outside linebacker to handle the injuries that they've had. Because they have Will Anderson, who, not that he would ever be a legitimate candidate, but I mean, his name's starting to, like, when you hear these Heisman lists, like people are starting to throw his name into that hat. And he's that sort of player. I don't think Lane Kiffin was wrong when he's talking about him potentially being number 1 overall pick. It would be 2023. He still has another year left after this. Crazy. But you have him, and then there was at one point, I think, 3 5-star kids behind him. Drew Sanders was one of them. Now Drew Sanders has that hand injury. He's kind of week to week. I don't think they're going to rush it. Yeah. Even what we just talked about, you don't really necessarily need him. But you have Chris Braswell, who's another 5-star kid who I think is getting a lot more playing time. And you have Dallas Turner, the freshman, who was also a 5-star.
Just keep throwing in the 5 stars. Just keep rolling them in.
That's who they are. And even then, after that, you still have Quandarius Robinson, who had the suspension early on because of the DUI, but he's back now. He's a 4-star kid, top 100. Like he potentially could play as well down the road. So I think they're going to be all right there. And then they have, I think, a really deep defensive line group too that can kind of supplement that pass rush. And they're pretty healthy along the defensive line too. Running back's more of the issue because Brian Robinson carried the ball 175 times last week. It felt like, and by the end of that game, I was down on the field, like you could see him bent over and getting really slow to get up and just look like he was really beat up. And so you need somebody to kind of take that load off of him to let him last the whole season. Roydell Williams, I think, is going to be the guy they lean on a lot. Trey Sanders is still there, just not back to his old self in terms of getting back from that, the pelvis injury and all the internal injuries he had from the car accident. Like he's just not looking like the same player. And they haven't given him many carries, neither of the SEC games, but I think he's going to have to get some carries the way things are going. And then Kamar Wheaton, the 5-star freshman at running backs, also hurt. He has a meniscus injury. So when you're talking about replacing Jace McClellan, they have some talent. It's just the numbers are so short. And so, Saban's talked about moving a guy from another position. I think if that happens, it would be a very limited role. It would be an emergency role. I don't think we're going to see, a wide receiver out there getting 10 carries a game just because they had one injury. I think they're just going to lean on the guys they have. But this is where it kind of hurts them to lose. Like Kyle Edwards, they lost in the transfer portal. Keelan Robinson, they lost in the transfer portal. Guys who didn't think they would ever get a chance at Alabama, they would have if they had stayed. Yeah. And there are these injuries.
Patrick?
No. You said it quite well, my friend.
Saying it all out there, but I want to see if you want to add anything.
I mean, I guess to say on that, like you said, we were talking about this earlier, like the linebacker group and the running back group, probably the deepest at Alabama. I wouldn't discredit Jace's role on the offense. 3 out of 10 receptions went for a touchdown. He provides that kind of dynamic, to Brian Robinson's bruiser. I like Roydell Williams, but I think Jace will be felt. That injury will be felt. I would like to see kind of either you go 2 tight ends a little bit more, or pull up Slade Bolden in the backfield. Get JoJo Earl, get that slot kind of working on the flats, and that's how you're going to have to replace Jace, at least in the passing game.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think Bill O'Brien will probably dial up more screens and jet sweeps and things to just put the balls in hands of wide receivers a little bit more.
Like, you think it's boring, but seeing how these guys game plan, wouldn't it be so fun to see the slot and the tight end spot open up like that, and then a completely different offense from Alabama?
Yeah, and they already kind of are this year in the sense that like they're using more of the two tight ends. You go back to the stats from the last couple of years. Like Miller Forrestall was out there, but he didn't really get the ball too often. It was always going to the wide receivers. Now it's like, all right, they have two legitimate tight ends in Billingsley and Latu, especially with Billingsley kind of coming back into form here. And it's a different type of offense now, I think, than it was last year, just in terms of the personnel groupings they have out there.
Sure. Even on that Jameson is kind of your burner now. And Mechie was kind of doing that last year. He had a lot of big 70+ yard touchdowns. You can put him in some screens, put him in the middle of the field, give him the rock because he's a bruiser as well once he gets the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's not any lack of talent for sure at Alabama when it comes to offense, defense either. But one thing is, injuries, sometimes they tend to pile up. You see one thing happen one week, a guy the next week, and then like a week after that, it'll be like another 3. So something that Alabama is certainly hoping to avoid moving forward. But this one on Saturday, week 6 of the season, Texas A&M hosts number 1 Alabama, 7:00 kick on CBS, the doubleheader. The game before that at 2:30, of course, will be number 2 Georgia at whatever number Auburn is at this point. And guys, final thoughts, quick. What's the goal here? Obviously, Alabama going to leave Kyle Field with a win. I mean, I shouldn't say it like that, but it's going to happen.
You can never say that.
I can say that. What's the goal here? What is? I mean, and don't give me the Saban wants to see 4 quarters and clean football, whatever. Like what is truly the goal here? I would like both y'all's takes before we sign off. That's what you were going to say, Rodak. See, I knew that's what you were going to say.
I'll pivot. I'll say stay healthy based on what we just said. And I will say this, like I got a couple tweets about it the other day, like, oh, Alabama has all these injuries, like what's going on? They really haven't. Like they've been really healthy this year. Yeah. I mean, Chris Allen going down was a loss. Yeah. Now it's Jace McClellan. Besides that, think of another injury. I mean, there hasn't been. Brian Robinson missed a game with the ribs, but he would have played if it wasn't Southern Miss. Like they've been really healthy. It's a couple bad luck situations, but it's not like they're just losing guys left and right. Mm-hmm. So I think if they continue that against A&M, then they should be in good shape.
And I would say the point of it all for this week is you get to experiment with these different packages. You saw that in the Mercer game. That's when Kool-Aid got his first start and his first interception. But once Armour Davis came back, he wasn't playing. I think that's where you get to enjoy your riches. Is you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try a different defensive look. I'm going to try a different O-line look. And you get to play with these things that when you face Georgia, you get to enact. So I think being able to play with your schemes is where really all it matters this week.
Yeah, getting up big enough to be able to allow maybe the younger guys to get some reps, get some experience, and how that will pay off down the line. I mean, that's part of how Alabama continues to be the dominant presence they are, is that you're getting guys who are sophomores and freshmen who are getting valuable, not meaningful, but valuable reps early on in their careers because Alabama takes a 40-0 lead into the fourth quarter, whereas, not everyone has that luxury, especially in the SEC. So,
but even take the players out of that, you get to work on your systems. You get to work on your offensive and your defensive systems. And I think that's just as valuable for the coaches as much as the players.
Sure. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in to Bama News show number 6. Texas A&M hosts the Tide, the number 1 ranked Tide, looking to go 6-0 on the year. Aggies looking for their first SEC win of the season after losing to Arkansas and Mississippi State. It's Jimbo. It's Saban. Maybe not as much juice as we've seen in some of these matchups in the past, but still, that's always an entertaining thing to watch. So kickoff at 7:00 on Saturday. Y'all enjoy the game. We will be back with you next week. After the Tide potentially pull off another big win on the road in the SEC. You guys have a great rest of your Thursday.